Hi and welcome to Maths class. Today we're going to look at finding the midpoint between 2 points. And we're going to start with the example you can see in front of you where I've got 2 points A and B. Now I can clearly see that this point A has an x value of 1 and a y value of 3, and B has an x value of 4 and a y value also of 3. So they're both on the same horizontal line. So finding the midpoint between them shouldn't be too difficult. So what I'm essentially trying to do is if I draw a line from A to B, then I need to find this point right in the middle where this distance and this distance are going to be equal. Hopefully you can see this one's pretty straightforward. They're both at a y value of 3, so I just need to find the midpoint between 1 and 4. And if I just look at my x-axis, it's easy to see that it's going to happen at the point 2.5, 3. So it's not necessarily a whole number. In this case, it's not. So basically what I've done is I've actually found the average of 1 and 4. The other way I could have done it was this, 1 plus 4, and then divide it by 2 to find the average gives me 5 over 2, which equals 2.5. All right, let's look at my next slide. Now I've got to find the midpoint between these 2 points, and this one's actually even easier. I've got A, which is the point 2, 4, and I've got B, which is the point 2, negative 2. So if I look at the distance between them, I can just count squares. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. So if I go up to 1, 2, 3, then this should be exactly halfway in between. And that is the point 2, 1. But if you notice this, it's only the y value that I needed to find the middle of in this case. So what I can do again is look at this, 4, and then I'm going to add this y value, which is negative 2, and divide it by 2 again. And that gives me 2 over 2, which is 1, which is exactly what I found that the y value was. And I've just realized you guys can't see that. So let me shift it all. There we go. Okay, now you should be able to see it. All right, so I can either use the grid and just find the middle, or I can find the average of the y values. Now I don't need to worry about the average of the x values because if I add together 2 and 2 and then divide by 2, I'm back at 2. So, it hasn't changed. All right, let's go to the next slide. Find the midpoint between the 2 points shown. All right, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw my line just to see what this is going to look like. There it is. Now, what you should be able to see is that actually this goes up in kind of from corner to corner to here, to here, to here, and to here. So if I count this as kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, then I know that this here should be the middle. This spot here is going to be the point 1, 3. Now, let's look at where we started. We started with A, which is the point negative 3, 1, and B, which is the point 5, 5. So let's look at my x value. My x value of 1 is actually exactly halfway between negative 3 and 5. So let's look at this another way. Let's divide this line into a right-angled triangle. That way I can just consider my rise and my run separately. So from negative 3 to 5, my run is equal to 8. So from negative 3, I went 8 to the right. Half of 8 is 4. And if I want to go halfway, I need to go half of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. Brings me to negative 1. Then I just have to think of my rise. My rise is 4. So half of that is 2, 1, 2. So I go across to 1 and then up 2 to the point here. All right. So there's lots of different ways that I can think of about finding the midpoint. And the other method that's quite legitimate is the one I showed you where I said, well, if I go across 2 and up 1 and then across 2 and up 1, and I do that 4 times, I get all the way to the end. So if I only want to go halfway, I'm just going to do it twice. And that also brings me to this midpoint. Now that's all very well when I've got a grid, but eventually we'll be doing this without a grid. In fact, without even a Cartesian plane. So I need to just be able to think of the numbers -3 and 1 and 5 and 5. So to find the x value, which was the middle, I once again just found the average of the two x values. So to find the average, remember, you add them together and divide it by 2. Oh, now you can't see me from the other side. Let me fix this. There we go. Okay. -3 plus 5 over 2, which gives me -3 plus 5 is 2 over 2, which is 1. All right, and that is the x value of the midpoint. It's 1. To find the y value of the midpoint, I'm going to do the same thing. Add the numbers together, divide by 2, which gives me 6 over 2, which is 3. And that is what I found. All right, so when we get to the next slide, I want you to have a go at this one and see how you go. Pause it and then hit play to see the solution. So you've paused it. Now my points are actually written in there. So all I need to do is find the average of these two in order to find the middle. But that's not so straightforward because I've got fractions. Oh. Of course, my y value is easy. And I can guess, because my negative number is bigger, that my final answer is going to be slightly to the left of the y-axis. So let's look at how I'm going to calculate my x values. Yeah, if I do it there, you'll see. So I've got x is going to equal the average of those two. So I've got -2.5. And then I have to add 1 and 2/3. Then I have to divide the whole lot by 2. Messy. That's okay, we can do it. What I'm going to do is change these into improper fractions and then change them until they have a common denominator so that I can add them together. So -2.5 is the same as -5 over 2. 1 and 2/3 is actually the same as 5 over 3. That's a coincidence. I didn't plan that. And I'm still dividing the whole thing by 2. Now, in order to add those together, I need a common denominator. So that's going to be 6. So this will be -15 over 6 plus 10 over 6, still dividing by 2. So in fact, what I might do, instead of writing it like that, is I'll just put brackets around it and say divided by 2. Okay. Add these together, I get -5/6. And if I want to divide a fraction by 2, that's the same as multiplying by a half. So I get -5 over 12. Now there's no way I could have worked that out just by looking at the grid. Okay, I needed to do the maths in order to calculate it. But here is my midpoint, -5 over 2, that's just a bit less than a half. Sorry, 5 over 12, not 5 over 2. And still with a y value of 2. All right. For this next example, I want you to have a go at doing this. Hit pause and then come back and hit play when you're ready. I'm going to get started. My x values are the same, so I don't need to worry about them. It's going to be somewhere here. I don't know exactly where. So let's look at the y values. I'm just going to find the average of those two y values. So I have 3.1 plus 0.4 all divided by 2. So that gives me 3.5 divided by 2. Okay, I can grab a calculator at this point, but I shouldn't really have to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to think, what's half of 3? And that's 1.5. What's half of 0.5? That is 0.25. And if I add those together, that gives me 1.75. Okay. So that looks pretty much like where I guessed. 1.75 is my midpoint. All right, so now here we've got another example where they're not on a straight line, they're not on a vertical line or a horizontal line, and I'm looking for the midpoint. Now, just sketching, I reckon it's going to be somewhere here. It's definitely not a whole number either way. So I'm going to do my maths and I'm going to work out the x value and work out the y value by finding the average. Before I can do that, I need to know what x and y are. So x is -2 here, and y is 1, and x is 3 here, and y is 2. So let's start with the x's. The x value for my midpoint, and I can put a little xm there to say it's my midpoint, is going to be, I just add them together and divide by 2. That gives me 1/2. Yeah, that looks, I guessed it, I was a little to the right, but that's pretty close. The midpoint y value, I add 1 plus 2, and I divide it by 2, which gives me 3/2. I'm not going to rewrite that as 1.5, I'll just leave it like that. So that's 1/2 and 3/2, which is more or less where I guessed it, but I probably could have moved slightly to the left. That doesn't matter, that was just a guess to help me get my bearings. All right, let's look at this one. Same thing, have a go and do it yourself, and then pause it. Sorry, pause it first, have a go, and then hit play and see what I did. So A gives me -2, 3, and B is at 1, -3. So to find the midpoint, the x value of the midpoint is going to be -2 plus 1/2, which is -1/2. The y value is going to be 3 plus -3/2, which is going to give me 0. So the midpoint is going to be at -1/2, 0, which happens just there, and that looks about right. Oops, sorry, just there. Yes, that looks right. The other one didn't look quite right. -1/2, 0. All right, one more to do, and then we're going to do some without a graph. Find my x point. I'm going to see what I've got there. I've got -3 and 3. So -3 plus 3/2 equals 0. Now, if you don't need to do the working, you don't need to show it, but it is always worthwhile having a look at how many marks a question is. If this question was worth 2 marks, I would definitely show that working. If it was worth 1 mark, I wouldn't, because the mark will be 1/2 for x and 1/2 for y. All right, let's look at our y values. Actually, you know what? It's -2 and -3. I don't need to do any working out to find out that the middle is going to be -2.5. So I've got 0, -2.5 is my midpoint. Okay, we use capital M for midpoint so we don't get confused with small m, which is gradient. All right, so now let's use this method for these points. I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and then I'll write up my answers. So just hit pause and do them yourself. Okay, there are my solutions. For the first one, I found the average of the two x values and I got 1/2, the average of the y values and I got 2. So my midpoint is 1/2, 2. And for the second one, I did the same working out and I got 1.65 and 2.65. So let's look now at what our rule is. Finding the midpoint between A, which is the point with x1, y1, and B, which is the point with x2, y2. Basically, the midpoint is going to be the average of the two x's and the average of the two y's. So I add them together and divide by 2. And that's all there is to it. So one more slide of practice. Use the rule to practice these 3. Just hit pause, work them out, and then hit play to see if your answers are correct. And there are my solutions. Don't be afraid to use your calculator for B and C if you need to. Well, we're not really testing your ability to add and subtract fractions here. We're trying to work out if you know how to use the formula. Okay, so that's the end of our video on finding the midpoint between 2 points.